Hi everyone, welcome back to the another episode of Coding Talks. Myself Vishnaviji, and this week we will be further looking on the continuation of the Amazon Bedrock service which we discussed on the last episode. On the last episode we were discussing about some ways of infusing intelligence onto your enterprise applications with the managed service from Amazon, which is called the Amazon Bedrock service. We saw how the managed service, this Amazon Bedrock from Amazon, can heavily lift some of the underlying infrastructure management of hosting and inferring the foundation models, and how from your applications you can connect to the Amazon Bedrock. We were just looked on some of the overview about some of the foundation models like Amazon's own proprietary model, Amazon Titan, which is great for general purpose and search capabilities, and other interesting models like Anthropic Cloud, then Llama 2 model, and so on. There are other models as well. We discussed an overview what all those models can achieve, and how as a managed service this Bedrock service can host all these underlying foundation models, and by providing an API how it can effectively help you to utilize these foundation models very easily from your applications through an API. Not just that, there are a couple of other features as well, which we will dive deep as we go along the episode. This episode will be a more deep dive into the Amazon Bedrock service, especially about the application integration aspects and some of the service specific features that Bedrock can offer you. I will try to cover majority of the integration aspects in today's episode. In case if time doesn't permit, maybe we will be having one more session which features on some of the security aspects of this, of using the Amazon Bedrock service. This episode stands by its own. It builds on the previous episode with the understanding that Amazon Bedrock service is a managed service which provides an unified API that you can connect from your enterprise applications either through SDKs or CLI tools. SDKs are the preferred ways by which your application mainly connect with Amazon Bedrock, but sometimes CLI tools can also help, especially if the operations team needs anything that they can utilize from the Amazon Bedrock service. They can connect with through an API, especially connect with through with the CLI tool, either from the Cloud Shell, or they can install the CLI on their system. So that depends upon what the need for the different parties are. If they want to do some automation or some operational level monitoring and to infer some values from these foundation models, they can achieve that, especially summarization. If some error happens on a set of log files, they can summarize the information with the help of this foundation model. So it is not just about the application aspects. Like in the previous episode, if you look on the title, you can see like the title was like infuse intelligence into your enterprise application with Amazon Bedrock. So that was the title. So it's not just about enterprise applications or like the what we called monolith or modular services or microservices. Standalone parties can also connect with the Amazon Bedrock service through a CLI. Not only that, if you want to try out some of the features or to see how these models works within the Amazon Bedrock, you can straight away log into the graphical interface, AWS graphical interface, which is called the console, and you can do some of the testing from that side itself, like how each foundation model works on. You can give prompts, different prompts to the these underlying foundation models, and you can understand how these different models works. And also there are a lot of other factors as well, like you can evaluate these models, and the Bedrock service provides features to evaluate these models using different ways. Like you can do a manual evaluation, or you can also request the help of Amazon experts to evaluate some of the models which works best for your case. Those are different aspects which we will cover in the later episodes, but the main thing is from the graphical interface console you can connect. Then you can connect from your applications. Maybe it's your individual application, websites, mobile applications, or whatever. Or if your organization has specified training model needs, they can create a custom model with the help of SageMaker, and they can connect from the SageMaker to the Amazon Bedrock service as well. Other than that, the Amazon Bedrock service itself provides a customization through a feature called Retrieval Augmented Generation. Basically what it does is it connects to a knowledge source, and you can enhance the model, existing model, with your own training data, with your organization domain data, so that the response that is generated by the model will be aligned with the whatever your organization needs. So the data will be catered according to the needs of the organization. Especially this will be helpful when you want to connect your applications with your customers, so that you can tailor the output according to your customer needs. Now, as this episode is mostly about the integration aspects, we will be particularly looking into the integration with the CLI first. Usually whenever the integration is mentioned, in examples it shows either an SDK and its underlying methods to connect to the respective service, but I like to present that in a different way. We can start with using a simple tool like a CLI, AWS CLI tool, which can be downloaded from the website itself. Or there is another option also, like if you have an account in Amazon, you can straight away log into the console, and you can use the AWS CLI, which is called the Cloud Shell, which is an online shell tool which you can open from the browser itself within the console. It provides some storage space and all for hosting your scripts and all. So it will be the underlying S3 will be used for that purpose. Very minimal charge only will be consumed, but the main benefit is that you don't need to install anything on your system. Rather, you just need a browser which you can use for connecting to the service. So this CLI and both the Cloud Shell are great help for connecting and experimenting with the foundation model. Another way is that I already mentioned you, like you can log into the console, and there is a graphical user interface that is provided by Amazon Bedrock, which can also be helpful to connect to that. So before doing that, like I mentioned in the previous episode, there are certain prerequisites you need to consider. Like first of all, you need an AWS account. You need an active AWS account with access to Bedrock. So access to Bedrock means that if you are brand new to Amazon or AWS, or you first need to create a AWS free tier account or whatever account you feel comfortable with, and then to access some of the models of Bedrock, you need to enable the access. So for that you need different permissions, like for the Amazon Bedrocks requires specific identity and access permissions, which is called the IAM permissions. which should be granted to your AWS user or role. The good thing is that if you are creating your own account through a free tier, you will be the root account user. So definitely you will be having access to connect with these models. You need to do a certain step initially, but the permission will be all set if you are using the root account. But using the root account is not generally recommended, especially because when in an enterprise context, ideally you need to create a different user or role which should have the required permissions to connect to these models. Required permissions in the sense like when it comes to Bedrock, there are two main permissions which you need. So this varies, but the main two permissions are like Bedrock.invoke model. So first one, this Bedrock.invoke model permission is required for your IAM user to invoke the foundation model. And second one is like Bedrock.list foundation model. This is to list all the available foundation models. Then in addition to that, if you want to do certain customization on top of these foundation models, you need a specific permission called Bedrock.getModel customization job as well. Again, as I mentioned, if you are trying out this from your own account, you will be a root user and definitely you will be having permission, but it's not recommended in a production environment. So once you have the required permissions and required users, then you should request access to the model access. So just go to the Amazon Bedrock page and then you can modify or click on the manage access, and then it will list all the foundation models which Amazon Bedrock can offer you. If you want to try out all the models, you can select all that and then modify access. So the status will be changed to pending, which means that AWS should approve your request, which will take some time. Once that is approved, that means those models which you requested are available for your account to use. So that means you can connect from your API, CLI, or whatever way you can connect. One more thing to keep in mind in this context is like the Amazon Bedrock service is a regional service. That means this is region specific. Ideally, when you select a region, there are certain things to be considered. One thing is the number of models that are available. I'm mentioning about in the context of this Bedrock service, especially when you use some service, you need to look into the features that are available in a particular region, and that is one more. That is the first thing. Second thing is like the region you are selecting should be in close proximity to your customers, so that you can avoid the latency and other issues, and you can minimize the data transfer cost as well. So ideally you should select the respective region that is appropriate for you. And also another thing is not all foundation models will be available on all region. Because of that, you should be you should be considering the case. Like in the previous episode we discussed about these foundation models. Different foundation models has different use cases. Whatever foundation model you need to select that, and then you have to check whether that is available in the region which you are going to choose, and then you have to enable that model, and then once that is enabled, then that means that models are available for the region you choose, and it will be available for your customers to use through. From your apps, you can use through the API. Basically, this Amazon Bedrock service is a unified API which can provide all the different foundation models underlying. And also you can connect from the CLI as well. So once this prerequisite step is done, again, one more time I am mentioning, like you need to first have a account with the required permissions. Then second one is you need to enable the models which you need to access for a particular region. And the third thing is you need to prepare your application or CLI so that it can connect with the Amazon Bedrock service and infer and use these foundation models. We will start with looking on to the AWS CLI or command line interface tool. And this is simple. You can simply install and configure the AWS CLI, download and configure with your AWS credentials using the command AWS configure. If you are using from the Cloud Shell, that is also fine. Then the steps should be like once the configure, the AWS configure is the first thing you need to be run when you install the AWS CLI, so that it configures the CLI to your profile. And Amazon will store the profile. The CLI tool will store your profile and your context and under your account, and then you can further give the commands to this CLI tools. And next step is like you need to set up an AWS Bedrock client. So you need to create a Bedrock runtime client. You can use the AWS CLI command called AWS space Bedrock -runtime space invoke model. So this will set up the Bedrock client so that you can connect with the Amazon Bedrock service through the CLI. Then you need to prepare the input payload. So this payload is the information or the prompt that you are passing to the underlying foundation model. That means this payload which you are preparing should contain the actual payload for your request. That is the prompt which you are passing to the underlying model. Second thing is it should also include the model ID, which is very important because you are actually connecting to the Amazon Bedrock service, which is actually a managed service, and underlying that managed service is a bunch of foundation models. And when you pass the payload for a request, you are actually sends the request to a particular model which you want. So you need to mention the model ID. So if you want to use Amazon Titan foundation model, you should use that, or if you want to use the Anthropic Cloud, you can use that, or whatever model like GPT model or whatever model you want to use that accordingly. The model ID should be correctly provided, otherwise it will raise a warning. So the model ID and the payload, input payload, which means the actual prompt, are the two major inputs that you are prepare in the input payload step. So first we will configure the CLI. Second is like we will set up the Bedrock client, initiate a Bedrock client, and third we prepare the payload. Payload contains the actual prompt plus the model ID. Model ID means the as underlying foundation model. So this will vary when Amazon includes no more models, foundation models. It will be updated. So this episode is recording on the 16th of July 2024. So maybe after some point of time there will be new foundation models Amazon will add, or more further enhancement will be added on top of that. Maybe the APIs can change. Usually it won't change, but sometimes the way by which you are providing the payload and other information might change. So it will be good to always check the documentation to get the up-to-date information at the time when you are actually implementing these things. So once these things are ready, once the input payload is ready, you can just invoke the model. So invoke the model, you can simply run the command. So the command will be simple to understand, like it's like something like from the CLI you will be using the AWS space Bedrock -runtime space followed by a space and then invoke model. So invoke model is the actual command, and then you need to pass the model ID and the other information like the prompt which you need to pass. So prompt we will discuss in a bit later what is prompt is all about. At this stage, just think of prompt as a command that you are providing, command or input that you are providing to the model, that you want, whatever you want to achieve from the model. That's the prompt which you are providing. So if you have already used the ChatGPT or some other forms of Gemini or some forms of the generative AI online tools, you already might know the prompt there. So whatever you are providing as information to the as an input to that underlying model is what is called as prompt. So we will discuss about how to provide the best prompt and all a bit later in this episode. So now you pass the prompt and the model ID. Then what the Bedrock service will do is it will validate your request, and if everything is correct, it will process the request and it will send the response back. From the application, you need to parse the response, which will be in a JSON format, and then you need to extract the generated text from the output field. So that extracted generated text will be the one which you will be presenting to the user as an output from the foundation model. So all the other work, like the heavy work behind the managing, scaling and everything, will be taken care of by the Amazon Bedrock service itself, and you just have to call an API and use that accordingly with the respective permissions. And the cost will be based on the type of foundation model that you use and the inference, the kind of inference means the use you are actually having with this foundation model, maybe the number of tokens or other context things which might influence the pricing factor as well. The up-to-date information about all the actual pricing can be found out from the Amazon pricing page. Basically, it's based on the inference, the number of tokens and other things that you are passing to the model, and the processing and according to the processing needs. Okay, so I hope you understand an overview. Basically, invoking a model and then you just passing the request and then extracting the response and providing that to the user. That's what you are doing that from the CLI tool, and this could be a great help for operations team, especially if they want to do some analysis using these foundation models or do some form of a what we call the automation. So automation is critical and relevant in the operations field. For them, these underlying models can be used, and also when for diagnostic purpose, that is another use case where in case if want to analyze a lot of logs, they can provide that as an information to these foundation models and then extract the summary, which can be then communicated or can be used for further actions. Now this same thing can be done from the Cloud Shell as well. As you know, Cloud Shell is an online hosted shell provided by the AWS console itself. It's similar to the CLI tool which you install on the system. The only difference is that it is hosted online, and it has it's also similar to what we discussed. So whether you are using Cloud Shell or you are using an installed version of the CLI tool, the main thing to note down is that you have to select the appropriate model ID, and you have to refer the documentation for the appropriate model ID and appropriate prompt, that is the text that you are going to pass to the model. So in addition to that, you can also in the JSON token which you are providing to the model while you create the request, you can also pass some input parameters along with this prompt, which is called the some of the parameters which are used by these foundation models, and this varies according to the foundation model, but the common parameters which we could see in most of the models are maximum token count, temperature, and these things you can pass to the model along with the prompt to control the output So if you provide a temperature something like 1, it will provide the accurate one. If you provide a temperature something like 1 or something, it will provide the most accurate, it will provide the most creative output, while if you provide something like 0 or something, it can provide some of the descriptive output from the model. So you can vary it, you can, by changing these input parameters, you can vary correctly. So we'll discuss that when we discuss about the prompt part a bit later. Then another on consideration you have to be careful at this stage is like the error handling implementation is also important, because in case if you are passing something, especially the wrong model ID or the input parameters, if there is something wrong in the input, then definitely the service will raise an exception and you need to handle in your CLI accordingly. Then the security aspects as well. Security aspects, there are certain security aspects which are inbuilt within the Bedrock foundation models itself. It's not specific to Amazon Bedrock, but the foundation models itself have the responsible AI principles, security mechanisms within, especially if you look into the models like Amazon Titan, Anthropic Cloud. These are all responsible AI, so that the inputs and the inputs that you are providing will be evaluated, and the responsible AI principle will be the guidelines in forming the output from the model. So it actually have a safeguarding mechanism built within the model itself. In addition to that, the Bedrock service also provides some forms of security mechanisms in addition to the IAM. The IAM provides a list of security guidelines so that only respective users can access this output or whatever you are connecting to the Bedrock service. But in addition to that, the Bedrock provides a feature called guardrails, which can be used in such a way that in case if someone is providing any harmful inputs, then the system can take care of by itself based on some of the information that you are providing, and that information can be connected from your own account. Like it can be either connected from a S3 account or something, as a kind of a set of keywords or something, so that the Bedrock can itself safeguard the prompts and generate the response accordingly. So that we will cover in the next episode. Then the one of the suggestion by the Bedrock service is that even though we were discussing about the Invoke model in the CLI, there is a API called Converse API, which can be used to continuously communicate with the Bedrock service, and it's an unified API as well, which can be considered for many of the underlying Bedrock models. So Amazon Bedrock recommends the users to use the Converse API over the Invoke model due to this fact that it unifies all the inference requests, and also it can store the underlying context as well, especially when you are continuously conversing with the Bedrock, especially in the case of chat or virtual assistant kind of scenarios. You need to have the underlying context also in place. Because of that, to keep the underlying context and the past chats, if you use the Converse API, it will take care of by itself, and we don't have, as a developer, we don't have to manage anything from our own way. It will be managed by the Converse API itself. Now, at this stage, we are discussing the part where we are interacting with the foundation model. At this stage, I think it will be good to think about some of the different aspects or guidelines for prompt engineering. Prompt engineering, like we discussed earlier, prompting or prompt engineering provides a practice of optimizing the textual input to these foundation models to get the desired output from these foundation models. So it's a way of providing the best input to the foundation model to get the best output from the underlying foundation models. So what you need to do when you provide a prompt is that we should first design our prompt in such a way that it will get the best output. And also, like I mentioned earlier, there are certain parameters which are called the inference parameters, which are applicable for certain models. Example, temperature is one such inference parameter. If you provide a lower value like a 0 or below, it can give a more deterministic output, while if you want to have some creative output from these models, you can provide something like 1 or something. So along with the prompt, you can change these inference parameters as well, and this inference parameters depends upon the underlying model as well. Because of that, you have to check the documentation to get an overview of what all inference model it supports. And once you understand about this inference model, you can change the inference model parameters accordingly to get the best output from the foundation model. This is also a part of the prompt engineering. And another one inference parameter is the max generation, which can be used to refine the output depending on the need of what you need to get from the this service. You can set the max generated words or tokens accordingly so that it can refine the output. Then while providing prompt, be clear, simple and complete instruction should be provided so that the models can generate the content accordingly. And if you are providing a long list of lines like example code or something, then use separator code for API calls and example /no line, and this is fully supported there, and the models are optimized to consider that separator calls. Then sometimes you can indicate the output indicator, like what you want to get from the models. It can be some form of like a example or something, 2 or 3 examples which you can provide. And this is called a technique. This technique is called the few shots prompting, which means that you can provide some sample examples to the model so that it can generate the contents accordingly. Few shots model is useful because it improved the accuracy, because just by providing a few sample examples, the model can customize the output accordingly, and it is also more adaptable. With minimal data training, the models can generate based on the prompt, based on the examples that you are provided from the prompt. Then there's a default indication also you can mention to the prompt, in case if you are mentioning something to the prompt like you need something, and in case if it is not available, you can tell the model that if the information is not available, just present the output like this. Instead of providing some generic output, you can mention like hey, provide like this, and then the model will provide accordingly. So these are some of the prompt engineering. Prompt engineering itself is a different topic, and there are a lot of articles available online as well as on the Amazon documentation, which you can refer. Basically, the idea is to provide clear prompt and instructions to the model so that the output, maximum quality output, can be retrieved from these models. Sometimes it needs some tryout as well. So that is the need, that is the area where you can use the graphical user interface. You can select a model, you can provide some prompt, and then you can see how these models work, and then you can select the best model based on that. Sometimes you need to do a lot of analysis before you connect. It is not just like you simply use an application, call this Bedrock API and use some random model ID to connect to the Bedrock. Instead, we have to evaluate the model accordingly. Certain guidelines are available are provided by the Amazon documentation. If you check the AWS Bedrock service blog, you will get a lot of ideas about how the different organizations are using different models. And in the previous episode, we have also discussed about some of the ways by which some organizations are using these models, which model they selected and for what purpose. Somewhere using Anthropic Cloud, somewhere using Amazon Titan, somewhere using GPT model, and some will be using a combination of models as well. And also in the next episode, we will cover some of the ideas about the RAG or retrieval augmented generation, as well as the guardrails, which can further improve the output from these models. Okay. So far we were discussing about the integrating the application from a CLI standpoint. Even though CLI cannot be considered as an application integration approach, still the underlying mechanisms for connecting to the Bedrock service remains same. So by understanding this, you can connect your application as well. Next, in the this part of episode, we will be looking into the ways by which you can integrate an .NET application to Amazon Bedrock service. So when it comes to a .NET application, it can be a standalone application, a monolithic application, it can be a modularized application, microservices, or whatever kind of architecture application, can be event-based architecture or whatever kind of application, individual services or microservices, standalone services, whatever forms of application, everything will be applicable for that. So the idea is like even though I am presenting this at this part from the context of a .NET application, this can be considered for any application, whatever language or whatever type of application, because the Bedrock provides different SDKs for different languages, be it JavaScript, Python, or whatever. You can use the according SDKs, and then you can connect to the Bedrock service. Main idea is like you should have an account, respective user, respective permissions to connect to the Bedrock. Then you have to enable the models. You can either enable the model programmatically, or you can enable the model from graphical interface as well. Ideally, if it is on time, then you can enable it graphically, and then once Amazon approve that, it can be used for your specific account, for your specific region, and then you will be invoking the model through the SDK, and SDK will provide respective methods for that, and you will be forming an input request body, the prompt and the other parameters that you want to pass to the model, and of course the model ID as well, and then you will be executing that using the Invoke or the Converse API, and finally you will be getting the details from getting the response. Just like you call an API, you get the response from the model from the Amazon Bedrock service, and then handle the error and other parts, and then you will be extracting the output and presenting to the user. So that's the simple idea of the integration, whether it is CLI or the SDK or whatever. So from the .NET Core application, the easiest way to integrate is to install NuGet packages. Those who have worked with .NET, they will already be aware of this NuGet. which is one of the preferred way to integrate the third-party libraries. Previously, we used to add DLLs, and after the NuGet has introduced, it is very simple. Just from the Visual Studio, you can right-click and open Manage NuGet, and you can simply search for AWS Bedrock, and then it will show all the respective SDKs. And from here, you need to install two SDKs in particular, which is the AWS SDK.Bedrock and AWS SDK.Bedrock runtime. This can be done from the Visual Studio Code as well. Only thing is, instead of the graphical user interface, maybe you need to add that through the terminal, like the command line tool called .NET space add package. There are plugins also available to add that. So depending upon what you prefer, you can use that. Then once you are sure that whatever user that you are using to connect to the service should have the required necessary permissions, like to invoke the Bedrock models, and also to list the foundation model, then then you have to invoke that. Okay, so there are two things from the .NET application. You can use the Amazon Bedrock client to manage the different models or instantiate the different models, and also there is a method called Amazon Bedrock runtime client, which can be used for invoking the request. So similar to what we have discussed for the CLI, same way you have to specify the model ID of the Bedrock you want to use, then build an invoke model request with the model ID and prompt, then call invoke model async to send the request and receives the response. So this is important because most of the methods that are provided by the Amazon Bedrock are asynchronous APIs. So you have to await the response using the await operator, and then process the response body to extract the generated text or other output. So error handling, like I mentioned in the CLI, this is very important. Always include error handling in your code to gracefully manage some of the potential issues, especially invalid model ID, or sometimes request throttling also can happen. In that case, you have to gracefully show some message to the user to try something later. Then also asynchronous operation. These APIs are all asynchronous operation. So you have to always use await to wait for the response instead of blocking your application. Then the model parameters or the inference parameters that you are passing to the model should be in accordance with the documentation, and you have to provide that correctly and accurately to get the best output from the model. Then the other parts also you need to take care of, especially if you are connecting from your .NET application. The AWS credentials is particularly important. It has to be safeguarded in such a way that it shouldn't be used by any other parties. And also, if you are using some of the services within the Amazon itself, it is recommended to use temporary credentials with the help of roles. So roles are a preferred ways to connect from different services like the EC2, or if you are connecting from the Lambda service, you can use roles for that purpose. So roles means AWS will temporarily create a credentials and use, and then it will throw it away. So you don't have to create a credential like a key and username and use it from your application. So if you are using within the AWS services like Lambda or something, you can have option to do that. There are other preferred ways of also for storing these details, especially if you are using Key Vault services, you can store there as well, or somehow secure the credentials in such a way that it will remain secured. Then before we wind up this episode, I like to cover a few more things about the different methods that we can use. Either we are using the SDK or CLI or whatever. The three most important methods that are available within this Bedrock model are, one is the invoke one. So invoke is the fundamental way by which you are interact with a language model on the Bedrock. So it is like sending a single request or question to the model and simply getting a response mechanism. So you while we discussed about CLI and the SDK, we saw that we will be sending a payload, usually a JSON format containing the prompt, that is our input text, and also additional parameters like a temperature or max token, and also the model ID, so that the Bedrock can use. And this type of invoke can be used in most of the simple use cases, like a singleton interactions where you want a quick answer or completion to a question. One example can be, think of like if you don't want a conversational approach with the API, you can simply use this invoke to provide some information like a summary of information or something to the model, and then get the output and present that to the user. Or you can connect to some other areas as well. In the next episode, we will be discussing about some of the further aspects of this Bedrock service, which is called the agent, and also the knowledge base, where you can do some of the workflow mechanisms behind the scene. Additionally, based on the output that you are retrieved from the model, you can store it somewhere in either queue or somewhere, and then you can do some other workflow as well with the help of serverless mechanisms in AWS like a Lambda. Say for example, you are having some set of logs which you want to provide through the Anthropic cloud model, which can do a summary of that logs and provide an output. You can store that output onto a queue so that respective events can be generated from that queue itself to further continue the workflow. So this is the simple use case of invoke model. Then another one recommended approach which Bedrock recommends is to use the Converse API. So basically this is a streaming API. So instead of invoke, you will be using from the SDK or CLI the Converse API. Converse is actually a kind of a specialized interaction mode designed for conversational scenarios. So it allows for a more kind of a dialogue based model, similar to how we converse with a human or a chatbot. So here the mechanism will be like, we will be sending a series of messages in a conversation, but by using the Converse API, automatically the Converse API will handle all the past messages by its own way. So we don't have to much worry about on keeping the past messages and all. So simply it will take care of everything, the context and everything. It will be taken care of by the Converse API itself. So this Converse API is that is recommended, especially if you want to have some continuous interaction with the Bedrock and the associated foundation model. This can be of great help, and the use cases are chatbots, then virtual assistants, or anywhere. If you see some conversational model, like if you have used the something like a code filling or some form of conversation output from these models, those all areas you can use this one. Then another thing is the response that you are retrieved from the model should be, or AWS API should be handled. AWS Bedrock API should be handled in a way. So either you can straight away show that information, or you can use a chunked response also. Chunked response are are the best way to handle large outputs from a language model. And so instead of waiting for the full message to retrieve from the model, you can use this chunked response in such a way that when the response from the model is available, it can be handled and shows to the user, and the next part will be shows whenever the next part is ready. So it's like it offers a kind of a faster user experience, and it's also helpful for memory efficiency and error handling. So in the absence of this chunked response, what will happen is you need to provide some information to the as a prompt to the model, and then how to wait for the model to process that. Maybe the some of the models will support the chunked response. So if you use the chunked response rather than waiting for the entire processing, based on what the model responds back, you can present it back to the user accordingly. So this will be useful for showing displaying large articles, like if you want to provide some prompt to the underlying model, like write an article of 3 pages long. Then once a paragraph or 2 is ready, then automatically the model can respond it back through the chunked response. And the main thing is we have to use the chunked response in such cases so that it will act like a loop based on the response from the model and present that to the user. So I hope this covered everything related to the interaction aspects or the integration aspects of the Amazon Bedrock service. We will cover more about the other aspects like the security and the safeguarding aspects, and also some of the other additional features like knowledge sources and also knowledge sources and custom domains, then the agents to handle the workflow in a different episode. Thanks everyone for tuning into this podcast. The podcast will be available on all podcast platforms including Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music, or whatever podcast platforms you prefer. In addition to that, there is an YouTube channel also as of the same name, which is Coding Talk with Vishnu VG. YouTube channel has a lot of videos as well. Previously, when I had enough time, I used to had a lot of video sessions as well, which are available in the channel. Basically, I'm a .NET developer and a cloud architect from Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala state. So I have work experience working with the different cloud vendors like Azure, AWS and GCP, and I'm a community builder from 2021 onwards. So feel free to check out my YouTube channel, and also you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and the details of are available in the description. Thanks very much for tuning into this podcast. Please subscribe to me on any of these podcast channels or on the YouTube as well. So the podcast is also available on YouTube as well. There's a separate tab for that, which is called the podcast. So thanks very much. Have a great day.